Well, now that you've seen that it's possible to transition from an on-grid home to an off-grid home and to live in an RV and then to live in a house that you're trying to build, we'd like to bring up some challenges we faced along the way.
So when we first moved into the off-grid lifestyle, even though we were in the camper, we had to sign up for things and register for things in our new community. Whether that's a bank account or changing your driver's license or registering to vote, you have to have proof of your address. Well, typically that comes in the form of utility bills because that's the easiest thing to sign up for. Unfortunately, we didn't have any. So that proved to be one of our biggest hurdles in the beginning. What we found was a local bank allowed us to open an account based on our address assigned by the 911 office. Once we had a bank account, we were then able to open other things and take care of our driver's licenses and such like that. So you may have to make some phone calls and kind of figure out who's willing to work with what you have, but definitely a challenge you need to consider.
The schools are difficult because they need proof of address, and that's a tricky one. So you've got to basically do it in sequence.
Ouch.
The other thing you need to consider is there are some counties that make it extremely difficult to live off-grid. There are also counties and localities that won't allow you to move into a house while it's being built. You have to have what's called an occupancy permit. You really need to look into these things before you try to do this.
And even if you find a county that allows it, they could have a homeowner association, even in a rural area. We used to live in one of those in Colorado. We had 5 acres and everybody was spaced, but there was still a homeowner association that dictated things you could or couldn't do.
Don't be surprised when you move somewhere and you have a plan and you can't do it because of permits and requirements.
In order to kind of combat that, Rosa really wants to be in this video.
Yeah.
What I did was just spend hours and hours researching. We looked for locations where permits either weren't required or they were limited in what was required. You know, here where we found, it wound up being only a septic permit was required. So that made life a lot easier. There was also no homeowner association involved. So when you can find locations, and they do exist in many states, but it may require you to relocate from your original plan. So another big consideration.
But even with the septic permit that is required, the state that we live in does not actually require a septic system. So there's a way around that too, because we can legally use NSF certified composting toilets. So we don't even need a septic system.
It allows you to totally bypass. So that leads into learn the loopholes. You know, don't just settle for calling your local county ordinance office and asking a question.
They generally don't know the answer.
Oftentimes, if they give you an answer, ask where you can find it in the ordinance or in the zoning regulations. If you see it in black and white, then it exists. But if they can't find it, there's a good chance that it's a loophole that will allow you some freedoms. You need to know the law in order to make this a lot simpler.
If you're doing something very unique, it's probably not something they deal with on a daily basis, and they'll just say, no, you can't do that. That's not necessarily what's written in the law or the ordinances.
So about halfway through our little adventure, we'd been here about 6 or 7 months. And mind you, that was not the original plan. We had thought we'd be in the camper maybe 3 or 4 months, and then we'd be able to move into the house, and that the house would actually be plumbed and electrified and have walls before summer. Well, obviously that didn't happen.
Before winter.
Well, yeah. So we were faced with another kind of scare that we never dreamed of. And I want to forewarn you, this could happen no matter where you live. Even though our family had all the basic needs met, we had food, we had water, we had shelter, We had all the critical essentials you need to live a healthy lifestyle. Our standards did not meet the standards of certain other people. We were threatened to be turned into DCFS because they did not agree that we were raising our children in this environment. They believed our children needed an on-grid home with all the luxuries and modern conveniences.
Television and
yes, and so that is something that it really just added a stressor for a while. Thankfully, nothing ever came of it for us, but it's certainly something to consider if you're raising children. Hopefully that wouldn't happen, but you do have to understand, and by the way, this was not even related to putting ourselves out there on YouTube. It was a local person. So you have to consider that there may be people who vehemently disagree with what you're doing, and that's just kind of life. You
there
have
are
to
people,
be prepared.
yeah, they think that living off grid is barbaric.
Yep.
So I don't think it's so barbaric. I think it's pretty nice.
It's an adventure.
Yeah. So another challenge is finding contractors that are willing to do a very unique project and a very low cost project. Realize if a contractor is looking at doing a $5,000 job or a $30,000 job,
most of the time they won't even call you back.
yeah, they may not call you back, or you may be way down in the line. Also, experience in doing what you want to do because it's very unique. For example, ICF. We were lucky to find an experienced builder in ICF and somebody who is willing to split the work with me. Some contractors want to do the entire thing and they don't like splitting work. The plumber was another diamond that we found because, you know, plumbing has a lot of difficult labor to do. Drilling holes, feeding lines, crawling under the house, boring through concrete. Well, I don't think they much like that work, but that's work that you can do and allow them to do the highly skilled work of soldering pipes and gluing pipes and laying out the plan. That was a great benefit that we had is I did much of the grunt work and he did the skilled labor, which saved me a ton of money.
And saved him a lot of time.
It saved him a lot of time. He was very happy to do that, just show up and all the holes were cut and the stuff was trenched to the Fox block.
At the end of the day, he would give homework assignments to Sean.
And that was great. That was great. So if you can find a contractor that works that way, you'll be in luck.
But, you know, be prepared in the living situation where you're just kind of in the waiting game. You're often waiting on the contractors because of all those factors. I found it very interesting. I don't know, my inexperience, I didn't realize that they schedule many jobs simultaneously. So, you know, if it's nice and clear one day, they might work here, but if it's rainy the next day, they're gonna go work on an indoor project. Or maybe they get called out for an emergency, like the plumber, and it turns into a really long job and they thought it would be a short one. So you may only see them once a week or once every 2 weeks. And meanwhile, you're just kind of sitting here waiting because there's nothing you can do about it.
Well, and it turns out because of our uniqueness, we couldn't even get an electrician out here. I had to get technical expertise from the place I bought the system, and I had to work with other people that were experienced and professionals to get consultation because they were not used to or comfortable with a DC powered home that was off grid.
Well, and surprisingly, this was the real shocker. We called many solar panel representatives and salespeople and businesses. Well, it turned out everyone in our region specialized in connecting solar to the grid for the buyback programs. Not a single one had ever set up a totally off-grid system, and they weren't interested.
Yeah, a solar company, and they do a lot of commercial work, so they're used to large, massive grid tie systems. They're not used to small off-grid systems.
So definitely some challenges there. Be prepared and have an extra budget. And most of all, I think for us, the big lesson was you've got to learn to be flexible. You know, we had this plan for the projects we were going to hire the contractors for and the projects we do on our own. Well, it really morphed over time between the budget gradually being drained and just the lack of available contractors. More and more we had to refer to YouTube and our books on how to do-it-yourself type projects. And it's been a great learning experience, but you do have to be flexible and be prepared to do a lot more on your own than you expected.
And speaking of budget, realize a lot of the tax breaks and a lot of the tax incentives are for large grid tie systems. They will not give you anything for an off-grid system. You really got to look into the law and look at the tax incentives, because it's all about green energy, but it's not about being efficient and living off-grid. So be careful about that. Don't expect to get $30,000 grants or anything like that.
Yep.
So if you're going to live in a house while you're constructing it, realize that each room that you work on, you're probably going to have to either move everything out of it or cover everything or do some combination of both.
Invest in lots of plastic cover.
And air filters, because you have dust, you have dirt, you have debris, you have to clean up every single day.
With ICF, you also have concrete dust when they bore through.
Yes, so the dirt, the dust, the debris, the cleanup, the moving the furniture, the covering the furniture takes a lot more time than if you were able to live in a camper and work in the house, make the house a workspace. Making it a work and living space, very difficult, very time consuming.
Another thing we found, because the house is not closed in, is bugs. I don't like bugs. That's the part of me that just never became a country girl. We have battled just houseflies, we've battled wasps, we've battled a few random other things. But even though we closed it in as best we could, because we don't actually have the ceilings, we don't have the so-called filters that bugs can't get through, then it's kind of a job to stay on top of that to keep everything hygienic.
So finances, you really need to budget things out and divide it up and then track what you're spending. We've actually got a spreadsheet on the computer, and we keep receipts in a little metal box, and every week, I sit down, take those receipts and put them in their category. So if I budget $2,500 for tools, and after 2 months I've spent $3,500 on tools, I've got to go to the rest of my budget layout and take away from there to see what I can do. We've had to reprioritize. It's really
postpone things we really want.
Postpone things, that's right, because when winter's coming, you got to have insulation, so you postpone one thing for the other thing. I think keeping track of the budget, looking at what you want to spend, and then tracking what you're actually spending, because it's going to come up to bite you. We spent about $30,000 more on excavation work than we thought we would way back in the beginning. Well, now it's really biting us in the rear, because we realize, gosh, $30,000 is a lot of work on the inside of this house.
And when you're initially setting up your budget, that's a challenge in itself, because there's so many unknowns and variables. We actually got online and I took national averages for the year we were planning to do it.
Yeah.
Well, we never dreamed of the inflation and the COVID supply issues and the supply and demand issues that all kind of became the perfect storm just as we stepped into this. So our budget went out the window. Thankfully, I had read on there to make sure you leave a buffer of about 30% of what you think it'll be. Well, we had done that too. And we're going to use every cent of that as well. So when you're setting up that budget, make sure you have a buffer. And like he said, try to divide it out based on those averages, because that's really the best you can do. As you price it out with your local contractors, your local suppliers, you'll start to get more and more of an idea of how accurate that budget will be, and it allows you to tailor it a little bit and kind of shift those finances around, which will help reduce stress.
And speaking of stress, I think the high stressors in life are death in the family, marriage, and finances.
Every time I've taken the kids to one of the doctors to get them established here, they said, "Do you have any stress in the last year?"
So yeah, living in an RV with 7 people is stressful. Going over budget was stressful.
Still is.
Looking at going into winter,
Waiting
without
on
a house,
supplies.
waiting on supplies, having the wrong supplies,
Waiting on the contractors.
mistakes. Okay, there's just tons of stressors. And one thing we did was Saturdays, we took family days. We went out, we forgot about work. Sunday is always a day of worship for us, and it's a day of rest, and we do not violate that. Regardless of what needs to be done. Now, I will get my ox out of the ditch, so if we run out of water on Sunday, I'll go get water. But no, we have a day of relaxation. We have a day of fun every single week because it is so important to live life to its fullest, and you cannot focus solely on the house.
But do be prepared. And even as a couple, we're still talking and we're still sharing the same bed. So I guess we're on the right track.
Only because she's too cold to sleep alone. That's
Might be true some days.
that's-
But you do need to take steps as a couple as well, because we've unfortunately come across many couples who tried something like this and their marriage did not survive. It is a very stressful endeavor. And there's going to be a lot of disagreements. Fortunately, he puts me mostly in charge of decorating, and I put him mostly in charge of the practical setup side. But, you know, there's still
Those are mutually exclusive sometimes.
yeah, that's nice. But, you know, when it comes to where the finances will be allocated, we may not be quite so...
In line
there,
I
yeah.
guess, yeah.
Not just different pages, but different books at times.
Yeah.
So be prepared and try to set up. We do some date nights, and we try to take time for each other, and maybe even try to get the discussion off of the project.
In the end, all the hard work is worth it, though.
Yeah.
It's beautiful to say. I was so excited about building door frames, and I don't know why. Because I think I've done stuff that's much more impressive than that. But it was the door frames that really excited me. I don't know why.
Yep.
Well, thanks again for watching, and if you've subscribed, please leave a comment. We love to read them, and if you haven't subscribed, please do so and join us on our journey, and you can learn from our mistakes.
See you next time.